I'm Myra Christopher. I am the Kathleen M. Foley Chair in Pain and Palliative Care here at the center. And prior to me taking that position about 4 years ago, I had the privilege of being the CEO, President and CEO of the Center for Practical Bioethics, an organization that originally was called Midwest Bioethics Center. With me today are two people who've been very important in the center's history. To my right is Wynn Presson, who was, at that time that the center started, actually building the largest healthcare delivery system in Kansas City. It still is. It was known then as Health Midwest. Today it is the Midwest HCA division. To my left is Ron Benjamin, who was also a chair, former chair of the board, who has a checkered past of entrepreneurship. He's done all kinds of things in business. The thing that I have asked the two of them to talk about with me and you today is our history, the center's history, in promoting advanced care planning, and our early efforts to try to imagine that it should be commercialized. And Ron, I'll ask you to talk about why we thought that, because you were the first person who ever said that. So, I'm going to start. Who's the oldest among us?
I've got to be.
How old
I'm
are
75.
you? You're 75? Well, you are the oldest.
I'm 48.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and you were actually on the board before Ron, so that's a good place.
Actually,
to
Wynn
begin.
Preston recruited
Right.
early on.
At the
early
first
on,
watch
was
in
recruiting
Corinth.
people
We went
on,
to.
and I was one of those that was honored to be recruited by him.
Got suckered in, didn't you? So, the center had been involved in the Cruzan case. And because of that, and because of community-based work we had done around promoting what then we called living wills, we had some amazing opportunities. We had the privilege of working with Senators Moynihan and Danforth to develop the Patient Self-Determination Act. So talk about why, as the head of the large health system, why you thought that was important.
Well, it has such economic impact on healthcare delivery overall, because so much happens at the end of life, and people aren't prepared for it, and they haven't done any prior thinking about what they should be doing. And somehow we've got to bridge that, because it hasn't changed in all the years since then. It still is. I mean, all the figures are thrown around all the time about how much is spent in the last 3 months of life, and all of the money and the care that's thrown at that subject, that the last days of life. And it's such a complicated issue that wraps up with the family and what they want versus what the patient or the individual who's the subject of it is wanting. And we still are not doing the amount of communications between those parties so that each one of them knows what the other wants going forward. And so we still have this process of guilt and all the things that go into the decision making of how much do we do for grandpa or mom or whoever at the end of life, and they would want to live, or we want them to live as long as they can, so let's do everything we possibly can regardless of what the cost or the implications. We don't really think about what they may have wanted in the process, but we don't want to be caught with doing anything less than
everything.
And it is a total emotional process. It's somehow we've got, and I don't know how we do it, but somehow we've got to get beyond that, and it's through education. But we all know examples where
we've
education.
Been doing education for a long time around here, and the percentages are still about the same.
Yep.
About 30% of adults in the United States report that they have actually completed an advanced directive. Now, I was a little surprised that you said your initial statement was the economic impact on healthcare. You know, the center came to this because we were concerned about all the consternation and grief and the moral buzzing and whirling about what's the right thing to do. But we all recognized, and Ron, you were really probably the strongest voice at that point, that recognized that we had to have a business case.
Well, Myra, I think the business case is really overwritten by the case for doing what's right. And in business, as in many endeavors, the right thing means that all of the parties to the transaction need to be best served. And so I think Wynn is right on target when he says the economics are part of that consideration.
Okay.
So when you start looking at the parties in the transaction, there's the patient involved in the economics of the patient's family. There was certainly, as we looked at it, the economics of as it related to Midwest Bioethics Center and what we were doing, and the fact that we recognized that, boy, in order to do what's right in terms of education and so forth, we had to be economically sound and be able to afford to continue to be in existence. And so we thought, well, it also made good economic sense to offer the ability to create a living will in some kind of a electronic format that would allow the patient and the patient's family to know exactly what the patient wanted and so forth. And so we saw that as a business opportunity to provide the economics to the family and also to provide economic benefit to the center to be able to do that.
Well, and you had a really strong background in commercial transactions and using the internet, and you had ideas about how that could be facilitated that I would never have thought of because of your background.
Well, and of course, we're back in. This is a few years ago,
right.
So we're back in the early '90s, long before really the prevalence of the internet.
Right.
Certainly, long before anything like an application on a
right.
home computer
or
on a web
handheld device or
handheld
iPhone.
device.
Yeah.
So I think we were a little early, Myra.
I think we were too. And, we did actually jump into the deep end, and we created this division. We were just laughing about that we called Bioethics Development Group. And BDG. We were going to try to keep the center's mission discreet and exactly as it should be, but then have this commercial enterprise that would create revenues that would fund the mission. That
well,
was
as
the model.
though there was something dirty about the commercial side of it. And
well, we all know.
I strongly disagree
Everybody
with that
in
premise.
the not-for-profit world knows that business is evil.
And my checkered past,
yes.
Absolutely, I disagree that commercialization has anything to do with checkeredness.
But not just with the with advanced care planning, which was kind of the case in point, but with palliative care, just with improving end-of-life care broadly. We've said forever we needed, quote-unquote, a business case. So we have one now. It's called the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act, and it is having a huge impact on healthcare delivery, and more importantly, it's really focused primarily on reimbursement of healthcare.
But how much is still out there about the death panels and all the
Lord.
negative
Why
that
did you
came
say that?
into that? That was all part of the emotional side
Right.
that is still hanging out there among a lot of the opponents.
Well, when not only are those negatives hanging out there, but also back to the economics of any transaction having to be right for all parties. There's also some question from the economic standpoint whether this Obamacare, I think you mentioned,
Right.
or I will.
Some people refer to it that way.
Some people refer to it that way, but there's some question whether it's even economically viable.
Right. And I think we don't know. I think healthcare is at the precipice. I remember using that term one time, and you told me not to use it because you thought it meant falling off a cliff, and I thought it meant soaring off the cliff. But I think that we're at the precipice of major reform in healthcare.
That was the only thing we disagreed on.
Well, there are a few other things. But anyway, so now we see a proliferation of companies that are doing what we talked about doing 25 years ago. You know, when in 2008 we were involved with the Rand Institute and to develop a report to Congress on advanced care planning. And the Center and the Commission on Law and Aging at the American Bar Association and others worked on that. And I remember people whispering in my ear and saying, the Center's time has come. You guys are going to be able to capitalize on all this hard work you've done over the years. And it was just a few months later that this political fear-mongering emerged where people were talking about death panels. And boy, our time had come. I mean, nobody was interested in anything, any conversation about end of life. Yeah. And that does linger. There are data that say that about a third of people 65 and older still believe there are death panels.
Yeah, it's still being used by certain media.
Yes. Well, there are. But there's fear-mongering for political gain. But anyway, so here we are. Now, a few years have passed.
Yes.
We look rather worn at this point compared to where we were then. But I'm curious, as mature adults, and some of us have dealt now with some life-threatening health issues, what do you guys think? Do you still think is it important, or are we beyond the place now that people need to have conversations with their family and document their wishes? And do health systems have this all taken care of now, Wynn? No,
it's not taken care of. I don't see that we've made significant progress really in it, because there's so many examples around us that people who have been educated to the issues, but when the time comes, the emotions completely take over, right. And they just throw money at the issues like. Force themselves into financial straits, right. In the whole situation. We're now living in a CCRC, a continuing care retirement community, and
an old folks home.
Yeah. And it's just not discussed. It's something that even people today, you would think, and this is a highly educated group, 18% are PhD, MD, JD kind of things, and they the emotions related to death and dying are still such a big negative to discuss with family members. I mean, they haven't even discussed it with their family members, much less developing something written or something more specific.
Well, we've been socialized that more health care is better health care. So, Ron, you are a marketing wizard. I think Wynn is exactly right. That this is an issue of can you get over the socialization, the enculturation, the emotional aspect of this with a business plan. So what would you bet in 5 years, 10 years, will we still having this conversation?
I think not. It is an emotional situation. But certainly now the technology is there to give us tools that can allow the discussion to be exercised more readily. And I think it's really the younger generation that has to take the lead on initiating the conversations. And I think with social media, there's an opportunity to communicate with that younger generation that wasn't there before. It was very difficult to communicate with the audience, either the elderly or their children, when the children were as old as we were.
Right.
But thank goodness now we have younger children around.
Well, and one of the fortunes you made was in bulk mailing. And how's that business doing now?
Well, it's changed.
It's changed.
It's changed.
Yeah. And this needs to change.
And it wasn't bulk, it was personalized mailing.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yes,
Excuse me.
Yes.
Well, we need to wrap up here because I think people will not be interested in listening to three old folks go on and on.
That's assuming they've been interested in anything.
If they got this far, it's a mean.
I don't really care. If they are, they aren't, because I've had so much fun with you guys being here
We have
this
as
morning.
well.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting us.
We love you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.